The handcuffs clicked shut around David Nixon's wrists with a cold, final sound that echoed through the quiet morning air. His military service medals jingled softly against his chest as two police officers roughly pushed the 58-year-old black veteran against the side of his own car. The same car he had just finished washing in his own driveway. The same driveway where he had lived peacefully for 15 years. "I'm telling you, this is my house," David said, his voice steady despite the fear creeping into his heart. But Officer Jake Miller just laughed, a cruel sound that made David's blood run cold. "Sure it is, old man. And I'm the president," Officer Miller sneered, tightening the handcuffs until they bit into David's skin. "A guy like you living in a neighborhood like this? I don't think so." What these officers didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that in just 2 hours, David would be sitting at the head table at City Hall, watching his own daughter get sworn in as the new mayor of their city. But right now, all David could think about was the burning shame and anger flooding through his body as his neighbors started to peek out their windows, watching him get arrested in his own front yard. Wait, if you're a human and you believe it is good to treat everyone good, a like and subscribe will make me feel we think alike, and drop a comment about where you're watching from. The morning had started so peacefully for David Nixon. He had woken up at 5:30 a.m., just like he had every day for the past 30 years. Old habits from his time in the Army never died. He made his coffee, read the newspaper, and felt his heart swell with pride as he saw the front-page story about his daughter Sarah's inauguration ceremony scheduled for 10 a.m. that morning. Sarah Nixon Williams was about to become the youngest mayor in their city's history at just 35 years old. She had worked so hard to get there. Law school, years as a public defender helping people who couldn't help themselves, then city council member, and now mayor. David had raised her all by himself after her mother died when Sarah was just 8 years old. "My baby girl is going to be the mayor," he had whispered to himself, touching the framed photo of Sarah on his kitchen counter. The photo showed her in her Army uniform from 10 years ago, before she left the military to pursue law. Just like her old man, she had served her country with honor. After breakfast, David decided to wash his car. It was a special day, after all. He wanted to look perfect when he drove to City Hall for the ceremony. He had even bought a new suit, his first new suit in 5 years, hanging crisp and clean in his bedroom closet. As he worked with the soap and sponge, David hummed an old gospel song his mother used to sing. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and life felt good. His neighbors, the Johnsons, waved from their porch. "Big day today, David," Mrs. Johnson called out. "We're so proud of Sarah." "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. I can hardly believe it myself," David had replied, his smile stretching from ear to ear. But that peaceful morning was about to become a nightmare. It started when David noticed a police car driving slowly down his street. Then another. The car stopped right in front of his house. David felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. The same feeling he got whenever he saw police, even though he had never done anything wrong in his life. Two officers got out of their cars. Officer Jake Miller was a tall, thin white man with cold blue eyes and a permanent scowl. Officer Tony Rodriguez was shorter and stockier, with dark hair and a face that seemed carved from stone. Both men looked like they were looking for trouble. "Excuse me," Officer Miller called out, his hand already resting on his belt. "We got a call about someone suspicious in this neighborhood." David set down his sponge and walked toward them, his hands visible and open. 30 years of being a black man in America had taught him exactly how to act around police, even when he was doing nothing wrong. "Good morning, officers. I'm David Nixon. I live here. Is there something I can help you with?" Officer Miller's eyes narrowed. "You live here? In this house?" He pointed at David's well-maintained 2-story home with its perfect lawn and white picket fence. "Yes, sir. For 15 years now." "Uh-huh." Officer Rodriguez stepped closer, his hand also moving to his belt. "You got some ID to prove that?" David felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his voice calm. "Of course. Let me just—" "Don't move," Officer Miller shouted, suddenly drawing his weapon. "Keep your hands where we can see them." David's hand shot up into the air, soap suds still dripping from his fingers. "Officers, please. I'm just trying to get my wallet to show you my ID. This is my house." "That's what they all say," Officer Rodriguez muttered, walking around David like a predator, circling its prey. The situation was spinning out of control faster than David could comprehend. Here he was, in his own driveway, being treated like a criminal for the crime of washing his own car while being black. "Please," David said, his voice starting to shake despite his efforts to stay calm. "Just let me show you my ID. Or call my daughter. She's—" "Save it." Officer Miller cut him off. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." "What? Why? I haven't done anything wrong." But the officers weren't listening anymore. They were already moving toward him with their handcuffs out, their faces set with the kind of determination that meant David's words wouldn't matter. As the cold metal closed around his wrists, David closed his eyes and tried to remember what Sarah always told him. "Dad, no matter what happens, keep your dignity. Don't let anyone take that from you." But as his neighbors watched from their windows and the officers shoved him toward their patrol car, David wondered how much dignity a man could keep when the world seemed determined to strip it away from him, one humiliating moment at a time. The worst part was knowing that in less than 2 hours, he was supposed to be watching his daughter, the woman these officers would soon have to call Madam Mayor, take her oath of office. If only they knew who they were really arresting. The police station was cold and smelled like disinfectant and fear. David sat in a small, windowless room with his hands still cuffed behind his back. His wrists were starting to go numb, but that pain was nothing compared to the ache in his heart. He kept looking at the clock on the wall. 8:47 a.m. In just over an hour, Sarah would be looking for him in the audience at City Hall. Officer Miller sat across from David, filling out paperwork with a satisfied smirk on his face. "So, David Nixon," he said, reading from a form. "You claim you live at 1247 Maple Street?" "I don't claim it. I do live there." "For 15 years, David replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "And what do you do for work?" "Let me guess. Unemployed." David felt anger flash through him, but he remembered Sarah's words about keeping his dignity. "I'm retired military. I served this country for 22 years in the United States Army." Officer Miller laughed out loud. "Oh, now you're a war hero too? This just keeps getting better. I have my discharge papers at home. My medals. Save it for someone who cares." Officer Miller cut him off. He stood up and walked to the door. "Rodriguez, get in here." Officer Rodriguez entered, carrying a cup of coffee that smelled wonderful. David realized he hadn't finished his breakfast. He was supposed to eat a big meal before the ceremony because Sarah had planned a celebration dinner afterward. "So what's our story?" Rodriguez asked, settling into a chair. "Breaking and entering. Trespassing. Maybe we add resisting arrest too," Miller said with a grin. David's heart nearly stopped. "Breaking and entering? I was washing my car in my own driveway." "That's not what we saw," Rodriguez said smoothly. "We saw a suspicious individual attempting to break into a vehicle that didn't belong to him." "That's a lie." David stood up, but the handcuffs threw him off balance, and he stumbled. "Sit down," Miller barked. "And that little outburst just proved you're resisting arrest." David felt like he was in a nightmare that kept getting worse. These officers were going to ruin his life with lies, and there was nothing he could do about it. But then he remembered something that made his heart jump with hope. "I want my phone call," he said firmly. "Phone call." Miller laughed. "You watch too much TV, old man. You'll get your call when we're ready to give it to you." But David wasn't backing down. "I know my rights. I serve this country, and I know my rights as an American citizen. I want my phone call now." The two officers looked at each other. Something in David's voice, the authority that came from years of leading soldiers, made them hesitate. "Fine," Rodriguez said after a moment. "One call. Make it count." They uncuffed one of David's hands and led him to an old phone mounted on the wall. David's fingers shook as he dialed a number he knew by heart. "Hello." The voice that answered was crisp and professional. "James? It's David." James Peterson had been David's lawyer for 10 years, ever since David bought his house. He was also one of Sarah's closest friends from law school. "David, shouldn't you be getting ready for Sarah's big day?" David felt tears prick his eyes. "James, I need help. I've been arrested." "What?" "David, what happened?" "Two officers arrested me in my own driveway. They're saying I was trying to break into my own car." "James, they're talking about charging me with breaking and entering." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When James spoke again, his voice was ice cold. "David, what are the names of the officers?" David looked at the name tags. "Miller and Rodriguez." "Don't say another word to them. Not one word. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "But James, Sarah's ceremony." "David, Listen to me very carefully. Sarah doesn't know yet, does she? No, but... Good. Don't call her. Let me handle this. And David? Yeah. These officers just made the biggest mistake of their careers. The line went dead, leaving David confused but slightly hopeful. What did James mean by that? Officer Miller snatched the phone away. Time's up. Back to your chair. As they led David back to the interrogation room, he heard Officer Miller talking to Rodriguez in a low voice. We need to process this fast, Miller was saying. Get him booked and transferred before anyone important shows up asking questions. Why? What's the rush? Rodriguez asked. I don't know, but something about that phone call makes me nervous. The way that old man looked, like he knew something we don't. David sat back down in the hard chair, his mind racing. James had sounded so confident, so sure that he could fix this. But how? David was just a retired soldier living quietly in his neighborhood. He wasn't important enough to have powerful friends. Or was he? At exactly 9:15 a.m., the door to the interrogation room burst open. But it wasn't James who walked in. It was Captain Williams. The police captain David had met several times at Sarah's birthday parties and family gatherings. Captain Williams was Sarah's father-in-law. The look on Captain Williams' face was like thunder, and lightning rolled into one. His eyes swept over David sitting handcuffed in the chair, then fixed on Officers Miller and Rodriguez with a kind of stare that could melt steel. What, he said in a voice so quiet it was terrifying, is going on here? Officer Miller jumped to his feet. Captain Williams. Sir, we arrested this suspect for... Suspect. Captain Williams stepped closer to Miller. This suspect has a name, and that name is David Nixon. Rodriguez looked confused. Sir, do you know this man? Captain Williams walked over to David and gently helped him to his feet. Gentlemen, he said, his voice getting dangerously quiet. Meet my daughter-in-law's father. Meet the man who raised the woman who, in exactly 45 minutes, will become the mayor of this city. The color drained from both officers' faces so fast that David almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Meet, Captain Williams continued, the man who will be sitting at the head table at City Hall while you two explain to me how you arrested an innocent man in his own driveway. Officer Miller's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. We didn't know, the call said. What call? Captain Williams demanded. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the clock. David watched as the two officers realized they were about to dig themselves into an even deeper hole. Well, Captain Williams asked, his patience clearly running out. Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat. Sir, we didn't actually get a call. The silence that followed was so complete that David could hear his own heartbeat. Captain Williams stared at the two officers for what felt like an eternity. You arrested an innocent man, he said slowly, in his own driveway, while he was washing his own car, with no call, no complaint, and no cause except. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Except what, officers? Neither man answered, but they didn't need to. Everyone in the room knew exactly what the real reason was. Captain Williams turned back to David. Mr. Nixon, I am deeply, deeply sorry. This should never have happened. As the handcuffs finally came off David's wrists, he rubbed the red marks they had left behind. In 30 minutes, he needed to be at City Hall watching his daughter make history. But first, Officers Miller and Rodriguez were about to learn a very hard lesson about what happens when you mess with the wrong family. The grand ballroom at City Hall had never looked more beautiful. Red, white, and blue decorations hung from every corner, and hundreds of people filled the seats, all waiting to witness history. At exactly 10 a.m., Sarah Nixon Williams would become the youngest mayor in the city's history. David stood at the back of the room, straightening his new tie. His wrists still had red marks from the handcuffs, but Captain Williams had personally driven him home to get cleaned up and changed. Now, wearing his best suit with his military service pins on his lapel, David looked every inch the proud father he was. You ready for this? Captain Williams asked, standing beside him. David smiled, but there was steel in his eyes. More ready than I've ever been. At the front of the room, Sarah stood behind the podium, radiant in a navy blue dress that brought out her eyes, the same eyes she had inherited from David. She looked confident and strong, every bit the leader she had always been. The ceremony began with the Pledge of Allegiance. David's voice rang out loud and clear as he recited the words he had said thousands of times during his military service. Several rows ahead of him, he could see the backs of Officers Miller and Rodriguez's heads. They had been ordered to attend the ceremony as part of their regular duties. They had no idea what was coming. After the pledge, the current mayor, Mr. Henderson, stepped up to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today we welcome a new leader to our city. But before we swear in Mayor-elect Nixon Williams, she is asked to say a few words." Sarah stepped up to the microphone, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you all for being here today. This is the proudest moment of my life, and I want to share it with the person who made it all possible." David felt his heart swell with pride. "My father, David Nixon, raised me all by himself after my mother passed away. He taught me what it means to serve others, what it means to stand up for what's right, and what it means to treat every person with dignity and respect." The crowd murmured appreciatively, and David wiped a tear from his eye. "Dad taught me these lessons not just with his words, but with his actions. He served our country for 22 years in the United States Army. He volunteered at the local food bank every weekend. He helped our neighbors when they needed it, never asking for anything in return." Sarah paused, and her expression grew serious. "But this morning, something happened that reminded me why we still have so much work to do in our city." David felt his stomach flutter. He hadn't told Sarah about the arrest. How did she know? "This morning," Sarah continued, her voice getting stronger, "my father was arrested in his own driveway while washing his own car. Not because he committed a crime, but because two police officers saw a black man in a nice neighborhood and decided he didn't belong there." A shocked gasp ran through the crowd. David could see Officers Miller and Rodriguez sinking lower in their seats. "My father was handcuffed, humiliated, and threatened with false charges of breaking and entering and trespassing in his own home, the home he has lived in peacefully for 15 years. The crowd was completely silent now. You could hear a pin drop. "Officers Miller and Rodriguez," Sarah said, looking directly at them, "please stand up." The two officers looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor, but they had no choice. Slowly, they stood up, their faces red with shame. "Officers Miller and Rodriguez," Sarah continued, "you arrested my father this morning with no probable cause, no complaint, and no justification except racial profiling. Is that correct?" Officer Miller's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am." "And did you threaten to charge him with crimes you knew he didn't commit?" "Yes, ma'am," Officer Rodriguez answered, his head hanging low. Sarah nodded. "Captain Williams, would you please join me up here?" Captain Williams walked to the front of the room, his face serious but determined. "Captain Williams," Sarah said, "as my first official act as mayor, I am asking you to conduct a full investigation into this morning's incident. And I am asking you to consider what disciplinary action is appropriate for officers who use their badges to intimidate innocent citizens based on the color of their skin." "Yes, Madam Mayor," Captain Williams replied formally. "I will personally ensure that justice is served." Sarah turned back to the crowd. "My father could have been angry. He could have filed lawsuits. He could have demanded revenge. But do you know what he told me when I found out what happened?" The crowd waited breathlessly. He said, "Baby girl, don't let this ruin your special day. Some people still have hate in their hearts, but that's their problem, not ours. We're going to keep being the good people we've always been." David felt tears streaming down his face. His daughter had become everything he had hoped she would be, and more. "That," Sarah said, her voice ringing with conviction, "is the kind of leadership this city needs. Not anger, not revenge, but justice. Not hate, but healing. Not division, but unity." She looked directly at Officers Miller and Rodriguez again. "You gentlemen will face the consequences of your actions. But I also want you to know that when you're ready to learn and grow, when you're ready to serve all citizens with equal respect and dignity, this city will be ready to give you that chance." The crowd erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. David clapped until his hands hurt, his heart bursting with pride for his daughter. After Sarah was officially sworn in as mayor, the crowd began to disperse. Officers Miller and Rodriguez approached David hesitantly. "Mr. Nixon," Officer Miller said, his voice shaking, we want to apologize." David looked at the two young men, because that's what they were really, young men who had made a terrible mistake. "I accept your apology," David said quietly. "But more important than apologizing to me is making sure this never happens to anyone else. It won't, sir, Officer Rodriguez said quickly. We promise you it won't. David nodded. Good. Because my daughter is going to be watching. And so am I. As the officers walked away, Sarah appeared at David's side, wrapping her arms around him in a tight hug. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry that happened to you. David hugged his daughter back, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume. Don't be sorry, baby girl. Be proud. You handled that perfectly. I learned from the best, Sarah said, smiling through her tears. As they walked out of City Hall together, David thought about the morning's events. It had started as the worst day he'd experienced in years. But it had ended with his daughter standing up not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been judged by the color of their skin instead of the content of their character. Officers Miller and Rodriguez would face disciplinary action and mandatory training on racial bias. They would both eventually become better officers because of this experience, learning to see every citizen as a person deserving of respect. And David? David got to watch his daughter become the leader he always knew she could be, using her power not for revenge, but for justice and healing. Sometimes, he thought as they walked into the bright morning sunshine, the best revenge is simply being the better person and raising a daughter who knows how to change the world, one heart at a time. The racist cops had accused a black veteran wrongly, never knowing they were messing with the father of the mayor. But in the end, they learned something far more valuable than fear. They learned about justice, dignity, and the power of doing what's right. And that, David knew, was a lesson worth learning, no matter how hard it was to teach.